You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson, and of course each week we bring you important, useful information on issues facing baby boomers, their parents, and of course, other loved ones as well. We always have a great show. I always start out saying we have a great show because all of our shows are good, and we have another one today. We have with us Carmen Davailus Buck. She's with Carmen's Legacy Productions. Carmen creates magic with images helping us stand out in the world. She left her career as a nurse practitioner to document the lives of families impacted by dementia and authored Just See Me, Sacred Stories from the Other Side of Dementia. She is a consultant and photographer for businesses and individuals who want to leave a remarkable legacy. She uses photography as an Alzheimer's advocate, knowing less fear equals more love, compassion, and kindness. Carmen, welcome to Boomers Today.
Thank you, Frank. It's great to be here.
Yeah, a lot of great, wonderful background, interesting background. I mean, the fact that you have been a nurse for, over 40 years, and you go from a nurse to a photographer. All right. Tell me a little bit about how that all happened.
I know that's a big question. Like, how in the world did that happen? And so, but it really makes sense when you hear it. So I'm in the clinic. I'm a nurse practitioner for about 20 years, and a good part of that, most of it was spent in care of the elderly and those with Alzheimer's and related dementias. And I'm in the clinic seeing one patient at a time or one family at a time. And I was fortunate enough to either do house calls or to have clinic time where I could spend time with the families, which is a real blessing now with 15-minute visits, right? I sometimes got 30 or 45, and I got to know people, and I literally just fell in love with their stories and how they managed to go from just a tragic diagnosis and the concerns and the upheaval of their lives. And during the time I knew them, I just saw how they transitioned and what they did about it. And I would just go home with a sense of awe, thinking, oh my gosh, if we all knew these kind of stories, we really wouldn't have such petty concern that we ordinarily do. Mm-hmm. And it was truly an epiphany one day. There was a particular family in, and it was very moving and had to do with hospice. And I thought, it just struck me, you need to just write these stories. And instead of all the time, my thoughts were, somebody needs to write these stories. This hospice day it just hit me like a lightning bolt. You need to tell these stories. And by the time I drove home, rush hour traffic, so an hour later, I'm thinking, I kind of had a plan in mind. And I couldn't imagine doing stories and telling the stories without the images. And so as a hobbyist, I had really never taken classes, but I had a good eye, and I just really studied and practiced. And about a year later, I was starting to document stories and doing photos and telling the stories for these families.
And is that what led into to your book?
Yes, this is it. And so my naive mind, I thought it would take about a year. It took closer to 3. Which again was a blessing in a sense, because what I didn't know at the time when I first started was that in telling someone's story, it's a very intimate, if you will. I mean, I get to know them, and they're sharing really vulnerable pieces of their lives and what they did, and the even the shame and the guilt and how they handled it, and the isolation that they're feeling. And their story became a part of my story, just as I became a part of their story. Because as their loved ones passed through the years, those photos became priceless treasures, especially then, right?
Right.
And I was so moved by that relationships that developed, and it just really and not knowing for sure how my business would look or what I would do with it, it really took that next level for me. Oh, I know exactly what I should be doing. I know exactly where my course is, where I'm being led, which was to tell those stories.
It's fantastic. So, are you? So the book. Why don't you let everybody know what the book is called?
Sure. The book is called "Just See Me: Sacred Stories from the Other Side of Dementia," and I followed 13 different families for anywhere from 2 to 3 years, and I asked one question. I asked, "What do you want the world to know?" Not necessarily about Alzheimer's or dementia, just what do you want the world to know? And not knowing or knowing what people are going to say, I got 13 different stories. And when I looked at it, I'm sitting there literally in my living room floor with 13 stacks of paper and hours of recording and their photos and thinking, how do I thread these stories together? And what I realized was that each story was started with a spiritual crisis, a spiritual need that wasn't being met, and then what they did about it. And there were 13 unique stories and different issues. Each one had different issues, different topics. And I couldn't have predicted that. It was divine intervention, just as it needed to be.
And
that's how it came about.
Were the families, was everybody receptive to doing this, or did you have some that just didn't want to participate? Well, this is obviously voluntary, or all voluntary, but not every. So some families may have been just 1 or 2 members, and others were 4 or 5, and the kids were involved, and more people were involved. The thing across the board that nobody wanted, probably 13 out of 13, not everybody was living for the time, but the photos. They're like, I can't imagine wanting to photograph this time of our lives. And I said, can you trust me on it? Can you trust me with this? I just have a feeling this is just so important. And they're like, we love you, we'll do it for you. But not really, it's not that big of a deal. However, when I returned with their photos and gifted the photos, trying to pry them out of their hands if I wanted to, it wasn't going to happen. That's fantastic.
It wasn't going to happen. And so then what I kept hearing was I didn't realize how important the photos were, how important these photos are to other family members. And
that's fantastic.
I mean, I've gone to a few, memorial services and family members I have never met. And when I walked in and said my name, I was just kind of swarmed with, oh my gosh, you took those photos. I don't know what we'd do without those. And
that's fantastic.
So
is the book a series of photos, or is there additional information beside the photos themselves?
Yeah, so it's their stories, their stories, and then because this took me 3 years, I also added in what it was like for me, my own take and what I saw, and then of course it has their photos in there too. Yeah,
and you know more than anybody, what's the old saying? Photo is worth 1,000 words, or whatever that saying is. Maybe even more than that in this case. Huh?
Yeah. And I say, it just takes one photo to change the world. And when we're talking about loneliness, and we go right into advocacy, like what are we doing to help the families and get attention? That one photo can stop people in their tracks and make them look and take it in.
Yeah, so that was going to be
it
was a great lead-in. Thank you for that. I was going to what I was going to ask is, with your 40 years experience, as a nurse and having a background and working with people with Alzheimer's, I mean, while you're doing this, are you also doing advocacy for those families?
Yes, and so what what came about is I realized that each family became an advocate, maybe without even realizing it, because their stories went on to help other families. And one thing that I heard from not just the families in the book, but other families that I've worked with, and I speak quite a bit and have, with various groups, and I hear the words loneliness and isolation, and that people feel that they're so alone and no one will understand. And I thought, okay, so my book are mostly read by people who are suddenly struck with needing to be caregivers, or dementia is new to them, and they're like, I need to learn as much as I can, right? I need to learn, and maybe I can learn from other families. And I'm like, well, what about the others out there who haven't faced that and are afraid? There's a lot of fear, needless to say, about dementia and Alzheimer's. It's a scary, scary thing. And so when families are telling me, gosh, our own family members run away from us or don't want to come by anymore, and they don't know what to say, or they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. And I thought, well, what can we do to help raise awareness in a way that people will not turn away from? And that's where Doggies for Dementia came about, because my thought was people love photos of dogs. And they're all pets, but especially dogs, right? And I'm a dog lover, so I say dogs. And I thought, well, it's that connection between animals and people. And what if we took a cross-section, people of all different ages, because, I've had 2 shoots so far, 3 actually, and they've been younger. Not all, but some have been younger, like in their 50s. Which is surprising to people who think Alzheimer's or dementia affects older people only. I think, okay, well, what about different cultures and different locations, and just show that, yes, they have Alzheimer's or dementia, but there's still love, there's still connection. And those are the photos that stop people, and they look, and they're like, well, what's that? What's going on there? And so...
So
in that sense,
tell us more about Doggies for Dementia. Tell us, you just kind of give us an overview, but is the Doggies for Dementia just incorporated in what you're doing with your photography, what you're doing with your advocacy? Is it all just kind of incorporated? There's a kind of a whole separate program.
Yeah, it's a part of my business, and it is a program in the business that I look at as the advocacy. And so I partner with like-minded, I say like-hearted businesses, and let's put these shoots together. It's 2 separate shoots, and one the day with the dog, and the other I deliver the photos. And that's usually pretty special when people see their photos for the first time. And we just do our best to get those out there. The goal is for it to become viral and to get noticed, and in that sense, raise awareness. So it's a part of my business, and it's that part of the advocacy work for sure.
Yeah.
Because
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Each shoot has a story. Oh no, that's okay. Each shoot has a story. Of course, it's that family story.
Right. Mm-hmm. So we didn't mention this, but you happen to be based in Texas, and I'm sure most of your work or all of your work might be done with people in your area. But we've got listeners all over the country, and actually in other parts of the world. And if somebody was interested in your services, can you service them? Could you help somebody or provide your service to somebody who may not be in your area? And have you done that?
Yes, I have actually, Frank, because I love to travel.
Okay,
and because
great.
I do get to speak quite a bit, if I'm going to be in a location, I work really hard to set up a Doggies for Dementia shoot and make it all, just kind of make that seamless. So I was recently in New York City, so last month's shoot was in New York and New Jersey. And I'm going to be going to England, London, England in June, for a speakers conference, the Public Speakers Association, and coordinating a shoot there. So that makes Doggies for Dementia international, which is super cool. And so I'm going to be doing that. And so, I say if I'm willing to travel, of course, and I love to, and we just make sure that while I'm there, I'm busy shooting. And so it's kind of 2 or 3 days.
So if someone wanted to, and I'll ask you, we'll bring it up again before we are finished up with the interview, but if someone wanted to learn more on your organization and how to contact you, you have a website, or what's the best way for them to do that?
I do. My website is carmenslegacyproductions.com.
Great.
And, Carmen's Legacy Productions. And there are different tabs there for the blogs and Doggies for Dementia and such. And my email is just simply Carmen at Carmen's Legacy Productions.
Great.
.com.
Perfect. So, I'd like to talk just about Alzheimer's and other related types of dementia. And this is a question I frequently ask people who have experience with it, and you have a lot of experience with it. And continues to be a concern of mine. But is this country ready for what's going to happen? It's happening now, but we talk about the silver tsunami, and in my opinion, the wave is just developing. It hasn't even hit yet. Okay, are we ready for what's going to happen? Are you concerned?
Oh gosh, yes. No, we are not ready. No, yeah. Frank, I don't think we're ready at all. On a couple different notes, I mean, the impact of dementia or Alzheimer. I'll just say Alzheimer's because most people are familiar with that. Alzheimer's is one type of dementia, but the impact on, I'll start with the family unit, is huge because typically, and in some cases, especially with younger onset, they're not able to work anymore. So someone else in the family needs to make up for that, and their life changes dramatically. Someone also needs to become a caregiver, or they need to arrange for some care and pay for that. And so there's the financial, there's the emotional, of course, which is huge. And financial burden impacts everything too. And so what happens in the family unit happens to us as a nation because, the resources are limited for families, very limited. And you can just imagine this network of impact. It's like the dominoes going in all different directions. And you're right about the silver tsunami. As we age, there are going to be more and more cases and more people diagnosed without the preparation. And it starts with even knowing enough about the disease. The other piece of it, out of the top 10 diseases of how people die, Alzheimer's has been, it's like one of the lowest funded. And yet, we have no survivors, and there's no, real preventable way or to slow it down. And we think a big reason for that is that in many diseases, the primary advocates are the people who are impacted. So let's say a person with cancer, as they're recovering or have recovered, they can be strong advocates and like, this is what the research and the trials did for me, right? They're the voice of that.
Right.
But with Alzheimer's, we don't have that because there are some, there are some people who do have Alzheimer's who are still able to advocate, and God bless them for that, and they're able to go out there and do their best with it. However, caregivers are generally overwhelmed, and they're not the ones to go out and have a big voice. They do their best, but they're barely holding on as it is. And so that leaves the rest of us to need to have a voice to make up the difference.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you bring up a great point, because I think the one thing that many families and the individual caregivers, once they kind of get into, being a caregiver for a loved one, especially with Alzheimer's or related dementia, that they don't realize what a tremendous effect it's having on them. And as we all know, and those of us that have been in the industry for a while know, that sometimes the person who is the family caregiver literally passes on before the person with the disease. because of the stress and all of that. So sometimes we forget about the caregivers are the ones that, need assistance and need help.
Absolutely. I say they're sometimes invisible, and that the focus is oftentimes on the person who has the disease, right, versus those that are there day to day. And a lot of times, I'll just say, especially with women, they tend to be a little bit more, I just call it kind of invisible. They're just kind of there and they're doing it. And it is, the word overwhelming comes up over and over. And, I know myself as having some experience with that even sometimes taking 5 minutes for yourself during the day is too much to ask. It's like, that's not going to happen today. It is just, it's a 24/7. And for one person or for even a few people that becomes their life, is taking care of someone else.
Yeah. And I know some may disagree with me, and this is just a very general statement. Every situation, of course, is different, all right? But in my experience, the person with the disease, all right, I mean, we're not talking cancer, we're not talking about somebody going through chemo, we're not talking about someone with I'm talking about Alzheimer's disease, that it's sad to see, but that individual might actually be doing okay. I mean, they're in a different state. It's the actual family caregivers that are probably doing more of the suffering. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it depends. Sometimes people are very aware, especially as they start to lose cognitive abilities, or they lose parts of themselves. They're not able to do things during that time. Is incredibly difficult. And then there's all kinds of mood swings, understandably, and problems in that way. And then the family needs to learn too. How do you approach? How do you say, you just don't want to come and go, let me do that, because then they're not able to do it anymore. So there's, that piece. But then as time goes on, much of the time it's as you're saying, the person really isn't aware, or we don't know, but we think they're probably not as aware of what's going on as much as the person, the care partner, the caregiver. And, that varies from person to person, and we don't often know exactly what a person is feeling or experiencing, because their ability to express that is impaired. And
so with I could talk to you all day long, but with the few minutes we have left here, we can't talk about this enough, even though we talk about what I'm going to ask on our show many times, but I always like to get the opinion of our guests that have experience with this. If we have which I'm sure we're going to have many family members that are listening that may be at a kind of an early stage with a loved one, maybe they were just diagnosed, and now they're, being confronted with this situation, and they're trying to learn. What suggestions do you have for them?
Well, I want to say first that although the initial thought is that feeling that they're the only ones experiencing it, and while their particular situation is unique, there are many, many people across the world, actually, but definitely in our country, who are having a similar experience and learning to cope, and can give them a multitude of resources that they may not otherwise know about, and to reach out. And I think there's a huge stigma associated with Alzheimer's and dementias, and so there's often shame saying, "Oh my gosh, my mother, my husband, my what have you has Alzheimer's disease," because they see people actually moving away from them, stepping away, and that's the fear piece of it. But the only way to change that is to have the courage to speak up and to ask for what you need. And sometimes you don't even know what you need, but even saying that is okay, because there are people out there who have been there. It amazes me how when I mention what I do, and I might just be in the grocery store line, right? Just like, oh, my mother. But all of a sudden people start speaking up, but it takes one courageous voice to say, I'm having a really hard time. I've got someone I love who has Alzheimer's and I'm not sure how to deal with it. Yeah. And suddenly the voice is raised. But it takes having that courage.
Well, it's a great segue, because I was so interested in hearing what you had to say. I didn't even take our midway break. So what I want to say for those that are looking for assistance and looking for help, certainly you could turn to our sponsor, Senior Care Authority. Senior Care Authority is a senior placement and elder care consulting organization that has a national network of professionally trained and experienced local advisors to assist families in determining the right path for your loved ones. They'll discuss various long-term care options, whether it's in-home care, assisted living, memory care, nursing, or if you just need an advocate to get advice from a local Senior Care Authority advisor, can help you now. For a free 30-minute consultation with an advisor in your area, contact Senior Care Authority at 888-809-1231 or go to www.seniorcareauthority.com and you can find an advisor in your area. And we've had with us Carmen Davailus Buck. You can learn more on her website by going to www.carmenslegacyproductions.com. And so I just want to say, Carmen, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today.
Thank you, Frank. It's a topic near and dear to my heart. I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah, and it was just you were a wealth of information, and we really appreciate it. We'll have to have you back. Keep us up to date on what's going on, all right? And I want to thank everybody for joining us on Boomers Today. Just be safe out there.
You've
and talk
been
to y'all
listening
soon.
to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.